This episode of the Officer Down Memorial Podcast is sponsored in part by Law Enforcement Labor Services in Minnesota.
Law Enforcement Labor Services, also known as LELS, is Minnesota's largest public safety labor union, with over 7,000 Minnesota public safety members serving in all areas of public safety: law enforcement, 911 dispatch centers, corrections, public safety administrative support personnel, and firefighters. Established in 1977, LELS serves over 260 different public safety agencies and over 450 locals across the state of Minnesota. With their administration, general counsel, 3 staff attorneys, and 14 business agents, LELS provides contract negotiations for better wages and benefits, grievance processing and representation, discipline representation, mediation and arbitration, assistance with representation for post-board hearings, and in-line of duty death benefits for survivor families. Find out more about law enforcement labor services at LELS.org. LELS.org.
Episodes of the Officer Down Memorial Podcast may contain strong language and violent content. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Sheriff Scott Rose from Minnesota, and I'm your host for today's new episode of the Officer Down Memorial Podcast.
Walking eastbound.
In each episode of the Officer Down Memorial Podcast, we'll share the details and the stories of how these men and women heroically lost their lives in the line of duty. Our mission is to help ensure their service and sacrifice is never forgotten. Thanks for spending some time with me today to remember and honor these fallen heroes. The musical Grease was released this year, starring 24-year-old New Jersey-born actor John Travolta and 29-year-old Australian actress and singer Olivia Newton-John.
John Travolta, Olivia Newton-John, Grease, the Broadway smash that made theatrical history by becoming one of the longest-running musical comedies of all time, breaks loose on the motion picture screen.
The People's Temple Agricultural Project, better known by its informal name, Jonestown, was a remote settlement in Guyana established by the People's Temple, an American cult under the leadership of Jim Jones, a cult that took the lives of 909 followers this year.
The charismatic Reverend Jim Jones controlled a cult based in San Francisco. To escape scrutiny, he moved the group to a jungle commune in Jonestown, Guyana. Jones' disciples gunned down Congressman Leo Ryan and 4 others after they visited the compound. Following the Ryan ambush, cult members committed suicide by drinking Kool-Aid laced with cyanide. The Jonestown Massacre, one of the darkest moments in Bay Area history.
The hit TV show WKRP in Cincinnati premiered on CBS this year.
Just maybe think of me once in a while. I'm at WKRP in Cincinnati. As God is my witness, I thought turkeys could fly.
The year was 1978. One of the oddest features of the United States northern border is actually located in northwestern Minnesota. It's known as Angle Inlet. Angle Inlet is a jut of land at the top of the state that shares land borders with Manitoba and Ontario, with other borders running through Lake of the Woods, Minnesota. Angle Inlet is completely cut off from the rest of the U.S., but remains part of Minnesota due to a series of mapping errors dating back to the American Revolution. Odd as it sounds, you actually have to drive into Canada and leave the U.S. in order to get to this part of Minnesota. Now, you could avoid going into Canada by going to Angle Inlet by boat. That is, as long as you're willing to take the nearly 40-mile boat ride to get there. The next county to the west in northern Minnesota is Roseau County. Roseau County was once the home of many Ojibwe, Sioux, and Mandan tribes. Artifacts from these tribes have been found within the county dating back over 7,000 years. Early European-based explorers in the area were primarily fur trappers and traders. In the 1890s, this area was part of Kittson County and Beltrami County, until governors in 1894 and 1896 took portions of both counties, a total of 1,678 square miles, and created Roseau County. Back in 1978, the county was home to around 12,000 people. Its county seat was the city of Roseau, which is the location of the Roseau County Sheriff's Office and jail. Jim Wright was serving as a young deputy there back in 1978.
A lot of the rural counties of northwest Minnesota were in the old days where the sheriff was the head guy in the county and you served at his pleasure pretty much. There was no union protection or anything. And the squad cars you drove, a lot of times are owned by the sheriff. So in Roseau County, each city would normally pay a contract to the sheriff's department to supply a squad car and 1 or 2 deputies. And you would be in charge of that city, but you'd have countywide jurisdiction. And then they had 2 countywide deputies that were in charge of all the rural areas. And those 2 deputies had to buy their own squad car, and they were reimbursed mileage.
For the deputies required to provide their own squad car, the county would purchase red lights. They'd put those in the front grille. They'd also put in a siren and a radio. There were no markings put on these cars. This was done so they could use these vehicles for family purposes too.
So for staff, that's what we had. The jail was small. It probably had 7 cells of different types. It had a small kitchen in there, and we, in a fridge, and that was it. And there was a 1 office space for deputies and 1 for the sheriff.
The sheriff back then was a big man in stature. His name was Paul Nakamoose.
Paul Nakamoose was a sheriff. He's a Korean War combat vet, big guy. And we call him the Moose. He was that big, Nakamoose. And when he first became sheriff, it was almost like a Buford Buster thing, where he'd go in there and people would challenge him and he'd just beat them down. And he used to be an amateur boxer too. Yeah, but he was loved. He was loved in the county. Everybody just loved that guy.
Full-time deputies back then were paid a salary of $650 per month. Now, in today's dollars, it's about $18 an hour. Plus, they'd get mileage if you used your own vehicle as a squad, and you were always subject to call. The newest deputy in the department back then was a young man from International Falls by the name of Richard Magnuson. Everyone there called him Rick. Rick was born on August 31st, 1957, to John and Margaret Magnuson, and he was raised on a small farm in rural International Falls, about 125 miles east of Roseau County, right near the Canada border. His father worked on the railroad. His mother cleaned homes and businesses. Rick was quite an athlete, and he took after his big brother Ed when it came to running.
He was good at sports and stuff. His main thing was running, but Rick still has the 2nd and 5th fastest time in a 4x8 80 relay, and we both ran the half mile, and the guy had the school record for 18 years with a time of 1:59.8, and that's the 3rd fastest time in school history. He always wanted to beat my time, and now I wish he had.
After high school, Rick graduated from the law enforcement program at Northland Community College in Thief River Falls. He served his internship at the Thief River Falls Police Department before being hired at Roseau County. Roger Magnuson was Rick's younger brother. Roger was 18 years old in 1978.
He listened to Mom and Dad, and he respected Mom and Dad. And him and I, well, we were close, but that also means that we had our tumbles. He was young at the time, so not a long time on the job, but he was a good-hearted person. He was a hardworking guy, and he was good with people. He really just wanted to, help people and protect people. It was a long time ago, so it's hard to remember some of the things. I can't actually remember his voice anymore,
Rick was a young deputy. He was going to turn just 21 years old at the end of the month and was already becoming a great cop. Jim and the others had been on the job a number of years, and they became Rick's mentors. Rick was known as the one that took his job very seriously. He was detail-oriented, he'd stay busy with traffic, and yet he had a great sense of humor and was great with the public. He was really the kind of young man everyone wanted to hire to serve in their police department or their sheriff's office. It was August 2nd, 1978. At approximately 12:30 a.m., Pete Ganji from U.S. Customs at the Roseau port reported he thought he had a car that had just run through the port of entry into the United States.
Law enforcement center, can I help you?
Yeah, say this is Pete Ganji, inspector out here at the port, north of Roseau.
Uh-huh.
I think we just had a car ran the port in Roseau here about a minute ago. If anybody could take a check on it?
Okay, do you have a description?
No, I just heard it come through and I looked out the window and the cone is knocked down coming toward the United States, so it was southbound.
Okay, and that's the Roseau port, right?
Right, the one 310.
Oh, okay then.
All right, thank you much.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, bye.
Most of these ports or rural borders aren't 24 hours, so after hours when they were closed, they would place plastic orange cones across the road indicating the border was closed. Now, they didn't have stop arms back then. They didn't have gates. They would just put cones out in the middle of the road. That night, Pete found a cone lying on its side, tipping to the south, which indicated to him that somebody had driven through the gates without stopping into the United States.
Okay, so right across the border, you have a city called Sprague, Manitoba, is right up there. And it was very common if somebody was sick or somebody's having a baby, you hate to say that because then you get into the 14th Amendment, but if somebody was sick and they needed a hospital quick, they would just run the border and they would go to the hospital. And then Pete Ganji was a border officer and he lived right there. There was a living quarters for him. And so he would just put cones across the road, and if somebody ran through, he'd grab a description, call it in, and we would stop them. If they're going to the hospital, we just helped them go to the hospital. If they were locals, because a lot of times locals would go up to Winnipeg and they'd be coming back down, and the nearest 24-hour port was War Road, and they didn't want to drive an hour and a half east to War Road and then come back through the port. They would just run it and hope they didn't get caught. We would take their name and we'd take their IDs and give it to the Border Patrol, and the Border Patrol would handle it. They could have like $100 fine. Americans come breaking the border or doing a run through. However, Canadians doing it is a crime for the Border Patrol. Okay, the Border Patrol would pay us deputies $10 for every run through we detained and turned over to them.
About 5 minutes later, Deputy Rick Magnuson reported on the radio that he was stopping a pickup about 3 miles north of Roseau on Highway 310. This was about 10 miles south of the Canada border. Rick initially didn't give dispatch the license plate number, so they asked him for it. Rick explained that it was hard to read, it had mud on the plate, but he started to read it slowly. 572790. He indicated he thought it was a Canada plate. Dispatcher Steve Rosine asked if it was a Manitoba plate. Rick answered 10-4, he thought it was. Manitoba is the province just north of Roseau in Canada. At this point, Steve assumed this was the same vehicle that ran through the port of entry, so he started to fill out a criminal justice arrest report to try and get ahead of some of the paperwork that would be needed to be sent to the clerk of county court. Then Steve heard a weak voice key up the radio and say what he thought he heard, 10214, in a quiet, mumbling voice. 14 was Rick's number, so if he was calling dispatch, he would call out 14210. 10 was dispatch. What he thought he heard was reversed from normal procedure. Now, if he heard right, the numbers were backwards, or it could have been just an open mic or mumbling or background noise. Initially, Steve thought this might have been Deputy Jim Wright.
Here's going to the current.
About a mile or so north, 3 miles north of Roseau on 310.
Traffic stop?
Run through. Hello? Yeah, were you just on the portable?
No.
Just sounded like it. Why don't you hop in your car and head north of Roseville? Rick's been out of the car for about 15 minutes on a run-through.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
Jim had to talk to Rick before during training about keeping his radio on. Apparently, there were a few times where dispatch couldn't reach Rick on the radio, and Jim would be asked to go check on him, and he'd find out that Rick was visiting with citizens in town and wasn't either paying attention to the radio or didn't have it on.
And I'm thinking, here we go again. I got to go out and find him, and he's going to be standing around talking to somebody. And this is my thought process. I'm teaching him a lesson. I'm getting dressed fast, throwing my shit on, and I'm running up there as fast as I can just to show him that he's got to be on the radio. He's got to answer the radio. And I did it once in Itasca County, and I got my ass ringed by Beefy Lawson. So I have a car. I had a Ford with a 429, and it had a 4-bell. It was the old days of the muscle cars and squads. And I get in there, and I go through town a little bit, and I'm going straight north towards the traffic stop.
Jim just lived around 3 miles away from the traffic stop, so it didn't take him long to get there. When he arrived at Rick's location, he knew something was wrong.
And this is where we run into going into hell. In the old days before LEDs and strobes, you had lights that just revolved around lenses, right? And it would blink, blink, blink. And so I'm in my squad, and I am going bat out of hell to teach them a lesson. And then I see one set of headlights, and they're not moving. Then I just see those red lights, and they just go around and around and around. And I know this is going to be the worst thing possible. I just knew it.
When Rick responded north out of town towards the border, he met a vehicle traveling south on Highway 310. It was late. There were no other vehicles on the roadway, and I'm sure he figured this had to be the run-through vehicle. So Rick turned around, got behind the vehicle heading south, and activated his red lights. The Chevy Blazer pulled over. Rick stepped out of his squad, and the driver got out, armed with a sawed-off .22 rifle, and immediately started shooting at Rick. The shooter continued to advance towards the squad, firing at Rick, watching for a second officer in the squad car. When the shooter got to Rick, who was laying on the roadway near his squad, the shooter, who was later identified as 21-year-old Greg McMaster, thought Rick was dead. So he took Rick's .38 caliber service revolver and his belt. McMaster would later tell investigators he always wanted a pistol since he was a kid, plus it would give him more firepower against the cops. McMaster then ran back to his vehicle, running through the pool of blood by Rick, and he left the scene driving south on Highway 10. Rick crawled back to his squad. He was now sitting next to his squad, driver's door open, with his back leaning up against the open doorway. Steve, in dispatch, was on the phone with War Road Port, asking them to run a check on the Canadian registration that Rick had called out, when Jim was heard on the radio requesting an ambulance.
Hello, War Road Customs, Bishop.
Yeah, Sheriff's Office, Roseau. Can you run me a Manitoba 28 real quick?
Okay.
572790. That's on a pickup.
572790.
Right.
Okay, I'll get right on it.
Okay. Thank you. Sheriff's Office.
That's the Customs of War Road. Would you recheck that number? The radio operator doesn't think that's the Manitoba number or pickup.
Yeah, I don't know. The officer said it was muddy or whatever, so I couldn't read it, and I haven't heard from him for about 15 minutes now. 20 minutes now.
Okay, we'll just keep on what we got then.
Okay. All right. That might be North Dakota. I'll try that.
Ambulance up here right away.
All right.
Jim requested an ambulance right away, and then requested the chief deputy and everyone to respond. Steve then called the hospital on their hotline and told them they needed an ambulance 3 miles north of Roseau on Highway 310. This is a nightmare all cops and dispatchers train for, yet pray never happens. The stress is on for everyone on the road and certainly for Steve Rosine in dispatch. Keep in mind, he's working alone. He's the jailer and the dispatcher. He handles all the radio traffic, he's making all the phone calls, and he's responsible for the jail. Now he believes he has an officer down. He has no other details, so he's stressed about that, but he knows he needs to get help out there ASAP.
Back to Ford. I need an ambulance north on 310, 3 miles north. I got an officer down, I think.
An ambulance north?
On 310, right straight north of Roseau.
Uh-huh.
Okay?
Okay.
Yep, thank you.
While Steve is calling Kurt, the chief deputy, Jim gives an update to dispatch.
So I come up there, and his car is facing south on the right side, partially on the road. Squad car door is open, and he's got his butt on the ground and his back against the inside of the driver's door. And so I get out, and first I got to figure out what's going on. And I get over and I start checking him. And I'm a registered EMT at this point, and I had built my own first aid kit. Yeah, because the ones in the squad were pieces of shit. I couldn't go to a car accident and know I'm going to be able to do first aid. There's nothing in there. So I get to him, and his collarbone is obviously broken, but the skin wasn't broken, and there's blood everywhere. And I think at that point I said, call everybody out. And I got back because I didn't have my portable with me. I loaned it to a part-time deputy. And so I got on the radio and I said, call everybody out. And I looked over, and this is the worst thing that no one knows what happened. The door shifted, and he just did a dead drop of his body to the ground, and his head goes on the ground. And so now he's laying down, and I go, Rick, who did this? What did he look like? Who did this? What did he look like? And all he would do is mumble some numbers. And it turns out he was trying to correct what he called in on the traffic, on the license plate. He'd gotten it wrong, and he was trying to correct it. So then, I go and I'm starting to assess him, and I can see a hole in his chin, then a hole in his throat. There wasn't a lot of blood, but he's bleeding out of his femoral artery, it turns out. So I ripped his, and I'm just doing it by my hand, I just ripped his pants apart. And I got my first aid kit. So I got dressings, I got gauze, I got everything I need. I got cling, so I got cling, and I got dressings and everything. And I wrapped it around his leg, and I'm checking everything out, and I'm trying to figure it out. And at this point, or close to this point, Nakamu shows up, Kurt shows up, and he's telling me, how bad it hurts. And I thought he was just beat to shit, because I didn't see bullet holes at first. I thought he had been beaten. And so I'm checking him to try and stop bleeding, and then his leg, he was full of blood, and he had a gunshot wound right there. And then as I'm working on him at this point, Rosine calls and says, well, they got an ambulance coming, they want to know what kind of injury. And I just, on the radio, you'll hear me saying gunshot.
1018, what do you got?
Gunshot wound.
Jennifer. No. Kurt. Yep. You better get out on 310 here, 3 miles north. Ricky's been shot.
Our 911 dispatchers are public safety telecommunicators. They are the most underappreciated first responders out there. It's calls like this where our 911 dispatchers are truly rock stars. They are put to the test without ever looking for or expecting any kind of recognition. They are the first responders. They're the men and women who take the initial calls and get help rolling. They are true heroes that never get talked about. The voice behind the mic that is often heard but rarely seen. What follows is a flurry of phone calls and radio traffic. Now remember, Steve is the only dispatcher on duty, and he's responsible for the jail.
Yeah, could you push that thing? I've got an officer shot. Pardon? The sheriff's office, Roseau.
Well, push, have a hurry, an officer shot.
Yeah, on that last 28 they gave you.
Yeah, okay, fine.
Okay? Thank you. Bye. I don't know, I got Ricky had a run-through. About 15 minutes later, I heard somebody on the radio, 10-14. It didn't sound right. I called 1-8 to check on him, and he come up there, he's shot. I've got a license number, but they don't think it's a Manitoba plate. So that sounds more like North Dakota.
Hello?
Yeah, Tom, you want to jump out? We got an officer down.
Where at?
Roseau. We're looking.
Steve is answering all the radio calls. He's calling back and forth to Canada trying to get a rush on the vehicle registration. He's fielding calls from the hospital asking for updates. He's calling out administration and every officer he can think of to come out and assist. Keep in mind, this was 1978. There were no cell phones, no pagers. All he could do was start calling home telephone numbers to try and reach everyone. All of this knowing in the back of his mind that his coworker, his friend Rick, had been shot, and he had no idea the extent of his injuries. Steve knew his responsibility was to get help there and to help get the suspect caught while he was still in the area. Now, agencies were also calling from all over offering assistance. Things were chaotic in dispatch, yet Steve did an amazing job keeping everything going.
572
3 North.
790.
Where is he? Pickup truck.
What?
Rick.
In North of Rosa right now.
Go out?
Yeah, I'm getting everybody out. Okay. Sheriff's office.
Good.
We've got an officer down.
Do you need more help out there?
Yeah, we'll take all we can get.
North on 310, any suspects?
We're looking for a plate. We don't know if it's Manitoba or North Dakota. All I got is the numbers. He thought it was Manitoba when he stopped it.
Okay, Manitoba plates.
572 790.
790. Okay.
Okay, that's on a pickup.
Okay, north on 310.
Right.
Okay, real good.
Right, thank you.
At 1:17 a.m., the sheriff was on scene, got on the radio, and advised Rick had been shot with a .22 caliber weapon, and the suspect had taken Rick's gun and his belt.
22 rifle or revolver. We found some empties at the scene. Appeared to be like a wound like that, but they also took his weapon with them. So you should give the officers that so they know what they're looking for.
24 117.
Now, Steve had to warn all area squads that the suspect, who had just shot Rick, was now armed with his gun too. Area agencies and State Patrol were advised, along with the RCMP, or Royal Canadian Mounted Police, so their border patrols were aware in case the car tried to head back to Canada. During a call with the RCMP, the Canadian authorities advised they had 2 escapees they were looking for out of Montreal, Canada. These 2 were considered to be armed and dangerous.
Any escapees or anything like that up there right now?
Yeah, we got a couple guys out of Montreal that are supposed to be out west here.
Montreal?
They're wanted for armed robbery.
Could you hold on a second? Sheriff's office.
Yeah, this is Deputy Last in Grand Rapids.
Right.
And, say, we were just discussing this teletype we got from you. You know, it reads a little different. He's shot. This deputy is shot. Is that right?
Right.
Okay, was it our guy down here that used to work with us, Jimmy Wright, by chance, or not?
No. It's a guy from International Falls.
Oh, deputy out of what's this, Roseau County?
Right.
Oh, he's from the Falls originally, though.
Right.
Oh, I see. How's it? What's his condition?
We have no idea yet. We're still going here.
Then he grabbed the guy's gun, apparently, yeah?
Yep. He used a .22. We don't know if it was a rifle or a pistol or what. And then he took the officer's weapon. We don't know if it's one suspect or more than one.
Yeah.
We've got a pickup license number, and that's all we have.
Yeah, I don't think that's a Minnesota license, but it may be another, state license.
Yeah, possibly North Dakota. I'm going to try South Dakota here as soon as I get time. But I got another guy on hold here, so I'll have to go.
We'll alert our local cars a little bit anyway, just in case to get his license.
Right.
What time was that now up there? This happened?
Okay, we got the run through at 12:30. At 12:50, I got the distress call.
Yeah.
I mean at 12:50.
Well, I wouldn't give him time yet to get down there, that's for sure. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Bye. Okay, where was I?
Okay, 22.
Yeah, he used a .22, either a rifle or a pistol. We're not sure which.
Okay.
And he got the officer's weapon.
Where did this happen?
3 miles north of Roseau on 310.
310, eh?
Yeah. What were these escapees you had? They're from Montreal. Considered armed and dangerous. They're escaped out of prison for armed robbery.
Okay, you want to... Just a minute. Go ahead, 17.
Yeah, pickup, North Dakota plate, parked sideways in the highway up here on 11.
Where you at, Thomas?
That's the sign here that says Junction 308.
Here, get the description.
The pickup just turned around.
Yeah. Yep.
Could you give me a description?
No, I don't. I'm at home right now. It'll be all at the office.
Your name is what?
Chris Martin.
I'll just stay in front of him, Dave. Watch where he's going.
Okay, your telephone number?
Our office number is also in my house. 437-2135.
437 what?
2135.
2135. Okay, hold on 1 minute.
Yeah, could you get it and call me back?
I'll see what I can do and look it up in the book for you.
Pardon?
I'll look it up for you and I'll give you a call back. What's your number down there?
Okay, it's 218 area code 463 1421.
Okay.
Okay?
I'll call you in for 5 minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Bye. Sheriff's Office.
Yeah, this is Old Tucker out in Custom.
Right.
Did you get a phone call about an emergency?
Yeah.
Beg your pardon?
What do you mean, emergency?
Well, we just had a car run through. I heard the office. Somebody trying to ring the office.
Yeah, I was just calling up there. We've got an officer shot.
An officer shot?
Yeah, on a run through. Come through on 12:30, and then a few minutes later he gets shot. We're looking for a pickup right now.
Again, remember, this was 1978. There were no computers, no way to quickly share information other than by landlines. Steve had everyone looking for the suspect vehicle. Now he finds out that this could be an armed escapee or escapees from prison, but he still had no description of the suspect or suspects or the vehicle to warn deputies about. And then the border has another run-through. Steve's now wondering if this could be related.
Hello, Dagan.
Is Dennis there?
Over the next several minutes, law enforcement are now checking every vehicle in the area, stopping every truck they see moving, and Steve is doing everything he can in dispatch to update officers and other neighboring agencies, as well as fielding calls from the hospital.
72790.
Jim would ride with Rick in the ambulance to the hospital, helping provide care, helping to keep Rick awake, and to encourage him to hold on, telling him everything was going to be okay. Jim stayed with Rick, comforting him in the hospital until he went in for surgery. It was now after 1:30 a.m. Steve now had to contact International Falls Sheriff's Office and ask them to notify Rick Magnuson's parents. He also had to notify Rick's fiancée. What Steve didn't know is Rick's mom and dad were actually in Roseau. They were visiting family that weekend. They were there visiting Rick.
I was home sleeping, and my mom and dad were actually in Roseau. And they were staying at my Aunt Mabel's house, my dad's sister's house. They were up visiting relatives and Rick, and I think Julie too was being visited there too. She was living up there at the time, and I got the phone call about roughly in the 1 o'clock area sometime. Coochin County Sheriff's Department is who called me, and they just told me that Rick had been shot. He said he'd been shot in the leg, and kind of left it at that. And you know, we ended the conversation, and I'm like sitting on the stairs, you know, after thinking, well, what do I do with this information?
Now remember, Roger was still just 18 years old. He was living with mom and dad. There were no cell phones, no internet, and mom and dad were 2 hours away in Roseau. So one can only imagine that Roger was in shock taking that kind of phone call as a kid and being tasked on notifying his family that the older brother he looked up to had been shot. He also didn't have his aunt's phone number, so he called his brother Dave.
I called my brother Dave, who still lived in International Falls also, and I called him up and told him about it. He had Mabel's phone number, so he called Mabel and got a hold of mom and dad. They went down to the hospital, and once they got to the hospital, they called us and said, we have to get there now. 3 of us were still living in International Falls, 3 of us boys. So we all jumped into one car with my two sister-in-laws, and my brother Ed was driving. And of course, he's going 90 to 100 miles an hour. And we got pulled over. Pulled over by the Highway Patrol. And my brother Ed, who was driving, he walked back to the Highway Patrol and told them what was happening. And the Highway Patrol said, get back in the car and keep going, drive safe, but don't slow down. And don't stop for any stop signs or lights. There will be nothing interfering you. It was pretty impressive how they were watching for him, and they were keeping an ear open on how his condition was and everything. And they said, we need to get there.
My brother Dave was still living in the Falls then. My brother Marlon was in the city, so we called Marlon and Dave. And then Dave, his wife, Roger, and me and my wife headed for Roseau. And we got stopped by law enforcement, got pulled over, and then when I told him who I was and why we were going that fast and everything, he tried to reassure us that things were looking better or whatever, which wasn't true. But anyway, he sent us on our way.
At 1:58 a.m., Chief Deputy Kurt Hauger, car 12, called out on the radio asking, what was the last digits of the one we're looking for? Steve in dispatch responded, 790. Kurt said, got him in front of me by the cut across at Bufflin's towards 310. Really hard to see. Steve said, 10-4, everybody got that? Several officers, including the sheriff, then set up a roadblock about 300 yards west of 310 on County Road 16. The chief deputy, who was behind McMaster, advised they were doing about 50 miles an hour. As McMaster came within 20 yards of the roadblock, he quickly drove down into the ditch and went around the squads. 3 officers shot at the truck as it went by. Officer Jim Berg, Officer Al Markovich, and Officer Yost. Bullets hitting the windshield, radiator, and driver's door. Officer Yost hit the front left tire just as McMaster was driving back up on the road. Officers then saw a road map and a gun thrown from the vehicle just behind the window on the driver's side. The vehicle went across the roadway into the north ditch and stopped facing east. Deputies surrounded the vehicle. The driver was removed from the truck at gunpoint without incident, and he was taken into custody. He identified himself as Greg McMaster from Connecticut. During the arrest, and after his Miranda warning was read, McMaster told the officers he shot and killed the owner of the truck in Drummondville, Quebec. He also told the officers he was wanted in Connecticut for jumping bond. McMaster was transported to the hospital to be evaluated and cleared before he was taken to the Roseau County Jail by deputies. Steve in dispatch then called Canadian authorities about the truck and found out a 17-year-old man had taken his mother's truck camping on July 27th, and his mother wasn't expecting him home until August 3rd. At the hospital, doctors determined Rick had been shot 10 times in the neck, shoulder, torso, and leg, and he had lost a lot of blood. So they contacted dispatch, telling Steve they needed type O positive blood for Rick. Donated blood came from other deputies, from other agencies, from Baudette PD, from Kitson County Sheriff's Office, and many others. Agencies from all around the area had officers and officers' families give blood and deliver it to the hospital to try and help. The investigation and McMaster's statements would determine that McMaster and his girlfriend, Lori Ann Sidbury, skipped bail in New Haven, Connecticut after they were convicted of 3 robberies. That's when they fled to New Brunswick in early July of 1978. McMaster claimed at some point she got away from him in New Brunswick, and he had no idea where she was. McMaster explained that his first car broke down near Drummondville, Quebec on July 27th. He explained that he abandoned the car and got a ride with a man driving a Chevy Blazer. That man ended up being 17-year-old Louis Bertrand from Drummondville, the young man who'd borrowed his mother's truck to go camping. They had a few beers, and McMaster asked him to take him back to where his car was. On the way back, at some point, McMaster told Bertrand to stop, that he wanted to get out. When Bertrand stopped and McMaster got out, he took a gun out of his bag and shot Bertrand 11 times in the head. McMaster then drove the Blazer with Bertrand's body out to a dirt road and dumped him out. McMaster's next victim was the following day on the 28th. He picked up a 19-year-old hitchhiker named Marcel Girard from Mattawa, Ontario. They drove until McMaster stopped near a side road by North Bay. That's where McMaster shot the man 6 times and later dumped him out in a ditch. When asked later why he killed Girard, McMaster told them he did it because Girard looked like he had a lot of money on him. Girard actually did have a lot of money on him, but McMaster never found it after he killed him. Girard had his money hidden in a money belt that he was wearing. A few days later, on August 1st, McMaster picked up another hitchhiker near Ignace, Ontario, 25-year-old Marc Darvong from Montrouge, France. McMaster said he shot Darvong 11 times in the woods on number 308 North in Manitoba. One can assume that Canadian authorities may have never caught McMaster back then. These were simply random killings by McMaster, yet victims shot like this so many times are often victims of crimes of passion, anger by family or friends from people they know, not strangers, especially strangers from a different country like McMaster. He would tell investigators that he started the killing because he wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. His 4th shooting victim was Rick.
We were all put into a private room because when we got there, Rick was still in surgery, and he had been shot, and the .22 caliber just ricocheted around inside of him. So we were put into a private room, and eventually some of my aunt, and from the Falls too, and my cousin Jeff, they came up too, so they were in the room with us. And my brother Marlon he lived in the Twin Cities, so he had a longer drive, like 7-hour drive. So he got there a little later, but they were just bringing in updates of the surgery continually for us, and they weren't sugarcoating anything. So after surgery, we got to go and see him, and that was not real pleasant to look at him with all the trauma that he had gone through. I remember little specks of blood coming out from his pores, So he didn't look good, and he was totally unconscious. And we never did get to see him be conscious.
After fighting for his life, after all the friends and family and neighboring agencies who donated blood, after everything everyone did, from Jim Wright to Stephen Dispatch to the doctors in surgery, at approximately 4:30 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon, Rick Magnuson died from his injuries. He was just 29 days away from his 21st birthday. On August 3rd at 1:10 p.m., McMaster appeared before the district judge, was officially charged with first-degree murder. A bond was set at $250,000, and he was officially appointed a defense attorney. The funeral for Richard Kim Magnuson was held at 10:30 a.m. at Moe Lutheran Church in Roseau. Rick's brother Roger remembers just how many people came out to honor and remember his brother and honor Rick's service and sacrifice.
The church was packed. Especially an officer that had died so young, so many people came, classmates, stuff, and everything else from high school. And it was, a lot of the general thing was a blur to me, because it was kind of overwhelming in a lot of ways. But the amount of police officers or Canadian Mounties or sheriff's departments or border patrol and everybody that was there, they couldn't sit down. There was no place for them. They lined both sides of the church and all the way through the doors and outside. And the processional was just continuous law enforcement going. And during the funeral, they did play, one of Rick's classmates actually played and sang one of the songs that he was part of writing. So that was hard for him. My mom and dad wanted him to do that again and record it. He said, I can't do it. That was pretty emotional.
Rick was buried at Forest Hill Cemetery in International Falls. As you can imagine, Rick's parents never got over losing their son. Holidays were never the same. And birthdays, well, Rick shared his birthday with his mom.
My brother Rick's birthday is August 31st, and my mom's birthday is on August 31st. So he was born on her birthday. So her birthdays were never birthdays for the rest of her life. And Christmas used to be, big gatherings and stuff, and the family and stuff, and that was pretty much ended. I remember growing up with my wife, and we'd been married for a few years then, and going up there for Christmas and sitting around, no decorations, nothing, and ordered pizza for Christmas dinner.
They were heartbroken, of course, as were us boys, but also they were very proud of Rick for wanting to make a difference by helping and protecting people.
In the end, McMaster pled guilty to first-degree murder charges and was convicted to life in prison. In exchange for his plea, he requested to be housed in Stillwater, not in St. Cloud. Back in 1978, a life sentence for murdering a law enforcement officer was life with a minimum of 17 years served. It would take 15 years for Canada to extradite McMaster to try him for the 3 murders there. At the time, there was apparently a clause in the U.S. extradition law which might have allowed McMaster to be tried in Canada and, if found not guilty, be allowed to go free and not finish his life sentence in Minnesota. Long story short, McMaster was extradited 4 months before he was scheduled for his first parole hearing in Minnesota. All 3 victims' bodies were found after McMaster gave statements to RCMP officers in the Roseau County Jail the day after he murdered Rick. According to Roseau County authorities, it literally took an act of Congress to get him extradited. The idea that a murderer with prior felony convictions and 3 pending murder cases in Canada would even be eligible for parole was frustrating and frightening for everyone involved. Sheriff Nakamoose was quoted as saying, "If this guy gets out, he will kill again." To this day, officers who worked Rick's murder back in 1978 still suspect McMaster may have other victims in Connecticut, after McMaster had asked them at one point if Connecticut had the death penalty. To date, as far as we know, he's not been charged with any unsolved homicides in Connecticut. In the end, the families of the 3 people he brutally murdered in Canada were victimized over and over again, waiting 15 years for McMaster to be tried for the murders of their loved ones. McMaster is currently serving 3 concurrent life sentences in the Beaver Creek Institution, a medium-security prison located in Gravenhurst, Ontario. Some referred to McMaster back then as the most dangerous prisoner in Minnesota. The reality is, McMaster was simply a coward, evident in his requests to deputies when he was caught, asking them to tell them I made a run for it and shoot me. McMaster showed no feelings, no remorse, and was not apologetic. Yet he was afraid to face the consequences for his actions. And had Rick not stopped him, not been shot by him, and Roseau County not hunted him down and caught him, this coward would have surely killed again. Sheriff Nakamoose said Rick was an outstanding young man, just outstanding. His attitude was that this is a great country and people here have the right to live free of fear of being harmed or their property harmed. The sheriff continued to say that it was enlightening to talk to Rick. He said he and Rick talked about the dangers of law enforcement, but he said Rick lived and breathed it. He said for a community to lose a young man like Rick is a real loss. Men like him keep this country great. He was willing to make any sacrifice to help do it.
Well, even the sheriff up there, he has said many times that he would have gone places, he would have been promoted and he would have made a good sheriff.
Mom had asked him why he wanted to be a cop, and he said to make a difference in this world.
He was an all-around good guy, and just didn't get a chance to show it to people. He just wasn't around long enough to really for that. And but never forgotten.
Steve Rosine, the hero in dispatch that worked Rick's murder that night, had always thought about going into law enforcement. even while he was still in high school. Rick's shooting was a deciding factor in Steve's decision to step up and ask for a road deputy position.
I had looked at state patrol when I was back in high school. It was kind of a him and haw thing. So after Rick, I asked Paul to take his position. And then, that fall I went down to BCA training in the cities. So I moved into the squad then. So I retired as an investigator with the department. I did 30 years full-time, and I've got about 20 years part-time. One of these days I'll smarten up and quit.
Steve said at the time he felt he needed to do something. Steve explained that throughout his career, his main goal was to try and help people, which is probably what all officers want to do, at least the good ones. At the time of this podcast, Steve was still serving in the Roseau County Sheriff's Office part-time as a bailiff in the courts at 76 years of age. That's 50 years of service that can, in part, be credited to the influence of a young 20-year-old deputy, Rick Magnuson. Jim Wright left Roseau County a short time after this incident and went to work for a neighboring county. Jim is now retired, and he lives in Puerto Rico. He was the first one to contact us about Rick's story, a story that he thinks about every single day, and a hero he misses every day. This hero's story, Deputy Richard Kim Magnuson, or known by all who loved him as Rick, his story was produced in 2025. Rick would have been 68 years old this year. He would have been retired, probably enjoying life up north with his family and maybe grandkids. Rick missed 3 decades of spending time with his father, John, who passed away a day before what would have been Rick's 52nd birthday back in 2009. His mother, Margaret, passed away 7 years later in 2016. Rick missed spending time with his siblings, with their kids, or running with Ed, continuing to see who was the fastest or who could run the longest. Rick missed out on all of this life, everything that many of us take for granted, because he chose to serve and protect. Not because he'd make a lot of money, certainly not because of the great hours and the stress-free work. Rick chose to serve because he cared. He wanted to help people. He took on this calling knowing that any given day or night when he walked out the door to check in at the sheriff's office, that day could be his last. Yet all this, and he was willing to do so because he recognized the importance of being part of something bigger than himself. He believed in service before self, the importance of being an active part of the community, in stepping up and making a difference and doing what's right. A strong character and a moral compass that Rick no doubt inherited from his father John, who served in the 99th Infantry Battalion, Separate, a division of Norwegian-speaking soldiers in the European theater of war in World War II. Rick's sacrifice was not in vain. The reality is his sacrifice likely saved the lives of many. There's no doubt McMaster would have continued to kill, whether it was innocent citizens or other law enforcement heroes like Rick. Lives taken that would have affected so many other families, other agencies, and other communities. Rick stopped the killing. If you ever get up to the community of Roseau, take a drive north on Highway 310 between Roseau and the Canadian border. This is the road where Rick gave his life, and it was designated as the Deputy Richard K. Magnuson Memorial Highway in 2022. Richard Kim Magnuson, known by most simply as Rick, wasn't on this earth long. He is the youngest line of duty story we've ever shared here at just 20 years old. But in the short time he spent on this earth, Rick made a difference. He lived and died a true hero. For that, we must never forget his service and his sacrifice.
Walking eastbound.
Thank you for spending the time to listen, learn about, and honor the memory of this fallen hero. Make sure you take the time to thank your local law enforcement for their service and their sacrifice. And don't forget to thank their families too. They also sacrifice so much for our safety. It's up to us to help ensure the sacrifices made by these fallen heroes and by their families are never forgotten. So please share this podcast with family and friends. Until next time, This is the Officer Down Memorial Podcast. I'm Scott Rose. Thanks for listening.